In part one, I introduced the subject with the question, do the Mormons really believe in the Bible? In part two, we will look at the Old Testament and what it says about the word believe. To achieve the task at hand, let me turn to my favorite Bible program here, Accordance, for a little bit of help. I am using the latest version of Accordance, 12.3.6, for our study. And no, I'm not a spokesperson or a salesperson for Accordance, so I'm not getting any kind of a kickback or a special deal on an upgrade or anything of that sort. In my opinion, it is simply the best Bible software on the market today when it comes to just about all things related to Bible study, especially linguistics, or the thing we're going to be looking at least briefly here today. Since the Mormons, as well as many Christians, prefer the King James Version as their go-to English text, let's bring it up first here real quick. And there we go. And type in the word believe in our search line here. And then what I want to also do is I want to set the search here for flex, which will take care of all of the words that deal with the forms of our word believe, and we hit enter, and voila, 277 hits here. What I also want to do is click on instant details down here at the bottom so that you can see what the results will be, at least for today, in Hebrew, without having to actually know Hebrew, and you'll see those popping up at the bottom. So what I want to do, though, is I want to change the range here to just the Old Testament, since we're talking about the Old Testament. And when I hit enter again, it changes from 277 to just 41. So that's just wonderful. So please note, I want you to take notice of this. We're just talking about the King James. As other versions, they would show different word counts, and depending for a variety of reasons. So if I change this quickly to the New American Standard and I hit enter, it changes from 41 to 39 hits here. And if I do the same thing with the New English Translation and hit enter, I get 29 hits. And if I just go to the NIV, which is very popular with many people today, I get 27 hits. It doesn't mean that any of these particular versions are committing some kind of an egregious error or there's a mistranslation or whatever. It just merely means that the translators, they decided to use a different word to convey a meaning that was synonymous with the original Hebrew. And we would pretty much see the same thing with the Greek, and we will see that later on when we get to the New Testament side of our study. Now, since we know that the Old Testament was not written in Elizabethan English, please pardon me there, that King James spoke, and we should also know that the Elizabethan English is not biblical Hebrew, as I've had some King James only advocates tell me one time. Let's bring alongside the Hebrew text, the Biblia Hebraica, and see what word was being used to translate believe in the English. So here we go. Let's bring this up. There we go. And what we want to do is we want to come back here, and there we go. We got to get our English word, King James, here back to 41 for believe. The Biblia Hebraica over here is a standard text used in many Bible colleges and seminaries when it comes to teaching biblical Hebrew. It is recognized basically worldwide as an authoritative text when it comes to translating the Old Testament. In fact, it was a text that I used years ago when I was first learning the biblical languages, especially Hebrew. And when I scroll over the word believe here, in our first example in the KJV, in Genesis 15:6, we see that it highlights the Hebrew word on the right over here. It's the Hebrew word hamin, which is in the Hiphial stem. Interestingly, and if I Go to our reference tools here and cross-references and treasury. There we go. This verse, this very first one we're looking at, is famously quoted by the Apostle Paul in his argument in Romans 4 and in Galatians 3, that righteousness with God is attained by faith or belief and not by works. Or it's another doctrine that the Mormons vehemently reject or they attempt to distort. It is also quoted by James, the half-brother of Jesus, which is a chapter 2 in James 2, that the Mormons frequently use in an attempt to pit James against Paul to try to justify their works-based argument for salvation. Unfortunately for the Mormons, they fail to see that James and Paul are making the same case, that a person is justified by belief or faith alone. They are simply making the case from two different angles, one before God and the other one before men. But anyway, more on that particular subject at a later date and in another video. So returning to our study here, the Hiphil stem itself, it generally carries with it the causal aspect, as in someone was caused to believe in something or someone. The word believed in Genesis 15:6 is also in the perfect tense. You see that at the bottom in the instant details, which basically carries the sense of a stated objective fact, whereby an action is completed. Therefore, in Genesis 15:6, Abram was caused to believe in God, which resulted in Abram's justification. When I click on View and Analytics, and then Analysis, and then blow this up here a little bit so that you can see it, we see that the root word aman is used exclusively in each of our verse references where believe shows up. There is 39 verses, or 41 words, and it's used in 4 different forms. Apparently, the King James translators were caused to believe that believe or believed were the best English words to translate the Hebrew word aman in the Hiphil stem. However, if I open up, slide this over here real quick, if I open up a Hebrew window, another one here, there we go, and then I want to search for the root aman, which is our word that we're looking for here. We want to make sure that it's a word first, when there's no such verses called aman. And we type in aman, and we hit enter. Wow, look at this. 396 words or hits. And if we we go down to our View Analytics and Analysis, and then we blow this up here a little bit, we see that it is in 22 forms in 372 verses. If I create a pie chart here, come back out of here, go down to View Analytics, go to pie chart, and then blow this up, and then change this to parts of speech, we see that 241 of these forms here are nouns, 108 are verbs, there are 44 particles, and 3 adjectives. I'll go back over here to this our word list here, because we see that the root has been translated as faithful, faithfulness, trust, guard, nurse, and so on and so forth. One interesting translation here is aman, or amana actually. And the reason I found this to be interesting, even though it probably doesn't have any association with an appliance such as a dishwasher, a refrigerator, or a stove that you may or may not own, is that you have this company, Amana, out there. I don't know if it's Hebrew or Jewish or not, but they use this word that means faithful or trustworthy. And if you happen to own an appliance that is an Amana brand, they may or may not have that in mind, that you have an appliance that is trustworthy or reliable as well. Anyway, I digress. Since we are dealing primarily with the verb forms here, since our question is about believing, we will restrict our study from here on to just that. From our pie chart, if we click on the verb then, we see that most of the references here are in the hiphil or in the niphal stems. 97 out of 108 hits. There's a sprinkling in the cowl and the hapal over here on the side. As noted previously, the hiphil stem is generally understood as causing something or someone to act in a certain way, whereas in the niphal stem, it denotes a passive or a reflexive type of action. The subject is being acted upon, or the subject is acting in his own interest. But what we want to do here is we want to look at both of these stems to see if they add anything to our understanding of the word believe in the English, or at least in the Old Testament. So what I need to do here, and I'm going to open up two Hebrew tabs. There's one and there is two. What I want to do here is I want to search for this root word aman. Here, aman. But I want to search for all of the Hebrew or the hiphil stems here in the Hebrew text. So I want to add any tag and hiphil, and then hit, there we go, in the hiphil stem, and I get 51 references. Now, this is an increase in our from our word believe in the English. But there seems to be a little bit of a disparity here, because if I bring up the King James here and how this word has been translated, we go down to Deuteronomy 28:66. This is down here, and we scroll over the top here, and we see that the word's been translated as assurance. Now, how could that be? We thought doesn't the word aman only mean believe? Well, no. You know, the translators, especially like in our example here in the King James, they decided to translate this as assurance, probably because it was awkward otherwise, and probably also unintelligible. So what they did is they substituted another English word to make sure that the person understood basically what was being said in the text in the English when they wrote it. We see this later on in Judges chapter 11 and verse 20. It says the Hebrew word there in the hiphil has been translated as trusted rather than believed. Now, believe probably could have been used there, but it is a synonym, and they basically mean about the same thing. We go on down to Micah chapter 7 and verse 5. We pan over the top here, and once again the word is translated as simply trust. If we go down to Job in chapter 4 and verse 8, we see that it is trust, as well as in Job 15:15, it is trust. We go down even further to 15:31, it is once again trust. And then lastly, in Job 24:22, it is sure again. So the Hebrew word aman in the hiphil stem, it basically has something to do with faithfulness, assurance, and trust. But it can carry some other nuances, depending on the context and the translator's effort to try to provide clarity for the reader. Now, if we do the same thing for the niphal stem, we want to search for the root, so we need to put in our word here, the root, aman, aman, and we want to be looking for the tag in the niphil, and actually the niphal, and there we go. Oops, hang on a second here. Cancel. Well, it might help if we actually used a correct word here. come on here. And of course now it's changing up on me here. So we need to go back in here and I'm on. There we go. There's nothing like trial and error here. So we got our 46 verses here. But there, once again, when we bring up the King James, we have some variations and renderings with the Nifal as well. For instance, if we go down to Genesis 42:20, it has translated the word as verified. If I go down to 1 Samuel 2:35 and pan over there, it is faithful. But if we go down a little bit further to 3:20, it's been changed to established. If we go down further to Isaiah 60 and verse 4, pan on down here real quick, it's been translated as nursed. How could you possibly get that? Probably because of the caring nature of that's behind the word itself. Like I said, it's reflexive. In Jeremiah 15:18, we see that the word has been translated as fail, as waters that fail. And we go down further here in Hosea 5:9, it surely be. In Psalm 78:8, it's steadfast. In Psalm 89:29, it's stand fast. In Psalm 93:5, it is very sure. And then once again in Job 12 verse 20, it is trusty. Elsewhere in the Nifal stem, it carries the basic same ideas as that in the Hifil, or faithfulness, trust, or reliability, or one, or a different synonym that is relative to that. That's the basic idea of the root word aman in the Hifil, in the Nifal stems. But one thing I will want us to look at briefly before we turn to our lexicon studies is how these Hebrew examples were translated into the Greek, since the Greek addresses the subject of belief as well. And of course, we already know what the Hebrew word for believe is, which is aman, at least at the root word, but we want to know what the Greek is. So what we want to do here real quick is set up our search to look for those. And so what I need to do is I need to open up a couple of more tabs here. There's one. And there is, where are we at here? Right here. Okay, there we go. Okay. Except what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be using the Masoretic text Septuagint parallel that was created by the Hebrew scholar Emmanuel Tove to identify the Greek words, the Septuagint writers. The Septuagint is the Greek rendering of the Old Testament. And what we want to do is we want to find those Greek words in the Hebrew text, and so that we'll have those available to us when we flip on over to the Greek New Testament study. So when I go to our first one here, I click on our search line, and I go to search, and I drop down to command, and I want to merge our study with our first Hebrew tagged here, which is actually going to be our second one here. And click on OK, and I go enter. There's our 51 hits right there. That's our Hifil stem right there. And as you can see, we have every Hebrew word here and the Greek rendering on the right. But we don't, this is going to be a little on the cumbersome side. There's our Hebrew word, and we see that it's epistusen, kai epistusen, with the wa on the front here. And we can go through here and we can find each of these this way, but there's a more efficient way of doing this, because what we want to do is we want to just see those Hebrew words and those Greek words standing side by side. So what I do is I click on my little gear icon here and set tool display. No, we're not tool display. We don't want that. We want show text as and the paragraphs. And voila, look at this. all of these Hebrew words, these 51 hits that we saw in the Hifil stem, that show up side by side. But we still have a little bit of a problem here as far as clarity's sake. So what we want to do is we want to add the titles, and there is our verse references beside them. And in each case, we see that it's pisteuo, or some derivative thereof. That is the Greek word that we want to be looking for. When I do the same thing over here for the Masoretic text on the Nifal stem, go to our search line, type in search and our command, and we want to merge it with, once again, our Nifal study, and I hit enter. There's our 46 references. And since, once again, we want to simplify this a little bit, I mean, I can do this by hit, it'll do that, but once again, we don't want every Hebrew word. We don't want every Greek word. We want just what's relative to our study here. So we go show text as and paragraphs, and then once again, show text as and add titles. And there we go again. All 46 references. And we see over here that the Greek words are pistos. In this particular case, it's thaumastos. And pistos and piston and so on and so forth. Those are the Greek words that are going to be important later on when we do our New Testament study. We see that it's exclusively, or pretty much so, in the Hebrew, not the Hebrew, but in the Greek verb is pisteuo, and the Greek noun is, or at least thereof, is going to be pistos, or an adjective, or an adverb, or so on and so forth. That said, what we want to do now is we want to go back to our Hebrew text, back here, there we go, and we want to do some lexical work here. So what I want to do here is I want to highlight, let me bring down the King James here one more time. I want to highlight the word here, which is heyamin in the Hifil stem, and I'm going to right click. And what I want to do is I want to look up in the dictionary here our word in a Hebrew lexicon. And there you go. In the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament, it has this to say about our word aman. It means to confirm, to support in the Kal stem, to be established, to be faithful in the Nifal stem, to be certain, that is to believe, in the Hifil stem. And of course it's got a whole list of derivatives down below here, as in faithfulness, verily, truly, amen, steady-handed, trusting, fidelity, firmly. You could just go on and on and on here, but I think you get the general idea here that the word means to trust, that it's reliable. We go on down here even further, we see at the heart of the meaning of the root is the idea of certainty. And this is borne out by the New Testament definition of faith found in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1, which sometimes is quoted by people or Christians to identify or to define what faith is. It has to do with certainty. If we go on a little bit further here, the definition given by the Theological Word Book is the constancy involved in the verbal idea is further seen in that it occurs in the Kal only as a participle expressing continuance. In the Hifil, or the causative, as I've pointed out before, it basically means to cause to be certain or sure, or to be certain about, to be assured. In this sense, the word in the Hifil, conjugation, is the biblical word for to believe, and shows that biblical faith is an assurance, a certainty, in contrast with modern concepts of faith as something possible, hopefully true, but not certain. There's a difference there, in other words. When the biblical writers use this word, they meant something definitive. It wasn't wavering back and forth, like we will see later when the Mormons claim they believe the Bible as far as it is translated correctly. They're injecting a certain amount of uncertainty there as far as it's translated correctly, even though most of them don't know how to translate. That's not how the Old Testament word for believe was understood in the Old Testament. It meant something that is assured. If we scroll down here a little bit further, and I've got this highlighted, it means Amen, which is, we talk about, prayer sometimes, and we conclude our prayers with Amen, which is really Amen. In the Old Testament Hebrew, it was something certain. In the New Testament, it's like, so let it be. There wasn't this wavering back and forth. But that's just one particular lexicon. Let's try a different one here and see if we get something else. Let's go to the BDB abridged, the Brown, Driver, and Briggs abridged edition, which has been a good go-to Hebrew lexicon and a source for translation, grammar, and syntax, and once again, Bible colleges and seminaries that teach Old Testament Hebrew. In fact, it was the first Hebrew lexicon that I ever owned, was the Brown, Driver, and Briggs, not the abridged, but the full edition. As was with the Old Testament, as was with the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament, we see that the same STEM assignments have been provided with some definitional results. Faithfulness, caring, confirmation, verification, reliability, firmness, trustworthy, so on and so forth. In the Hifil stem, we see that it defines Aman as trust or believe. The BDB also provides a list of prepositional usages. You can see them down here. To believe in a thing, to trust in, to trust or believe that, and so on and so forth. In essence, the BDB and the Theological Word Book, they complement each other, and they show no conflicts between them when they address the word for believe. And that being the case, so let's go ahead and try one more here. Let's try the Kohlenberger-Mounts Hebrew Concise Hebrew Aramaic Dictionary of the Old Testament. As you can see, Aman is a verb. It is the root of many other nouns and adverbs and so on, substantives and the like in the Hebrew language. And depending on the stem, it basically carries the meaning of believe, faithful, trust, or trustworthy. When I scroll across the links provided here, we see that the English words that have been translated from Aman, all of which basically repeat what we have seen before. Here we go, trustworthy, faithful, faithful and trustworthy, faithfulness, steadiness, trustworthiness, and integrity, reliable, another one there, trustworthy, trusty, and so on and so forth. If we look even deeper into this word, like say in the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament, we discover more of the same kind of commentary. That Aman, depending on its contextual usage, carries the ideas of caring, reliability, and trustworthiness. The Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament states for the Nifal stem, if one were to try to find a translation in English that would embrace different meanings of this word, the closest would probably be constant, which can include both the permanency of things and the stability and reliability of persons. The result is that one may build or rely upon the thing or person, giving proof of constancy. For the Hifil stem, The Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament has this to say. On the basis of this survey, we can make some summary statements. Hey Amin contains primarily a statement about the subject which gains confidence, mostly with reference to a person or a message. Even though it does not occur very often, the absolute use shows that Hey Amin can occur without any reference to something or someone else, and thus actually something is being said about the subject. Of course, in most cases, the text indicates in whom or in what confidence is placed. Thus, Hey Amin contains a judgment about what deserves or does not deserve confidence. Perhaps the best paraphrases that have been suggested to convey the meaning of Hey Amin are to gain stability, to rely on someone, to give credence to a message, or to consider it to be true, to trust in someone. When I turn to the New International Dictionary of Old Testament Theology and Exegesis, we read pretty much the same thing as before. In the Nifal stem, the word carries the ideas of faithful, established, or made firm. In the Hifil stem, especially when it is combined with a preposition, it basically means to believe in or to trust in someone or to accept something as true. The New International Dictionary of Old Testament Theology makes reference to our first Old Testament reference found in Genesis 15:6, and it offers a noteworthy comment about Abraham's trust in God and how Hey Amin is grammatically associated with other Hebrew elements to make Abraham's faith a part of his overall character. Nevertheless, hopefully by now, you get the gist of what it means to believe in the Old Testament, based on the etymology of the Hebrew word aman, from several different authoritative Hebrew sources. Of course, once again, there are going to be slight nuances depending on the context, which some Bible scholars and translators have noticed and then attempted to provide a more appropriate word for clarification's sake, including those who translated the King James Version. That said, if a person understands the Hebrew word aman and its derivatives to mean reliable, trustworthy, or to depend upon every time she comes across the English word believe in the Old Testament, he or she would have a very good grasp of what the authors meant when they wrote their particular word as they used that word. And as long as the word represented the author's intent, having taken the grammar and syntax into account, then the translators could be said to have rendered the word, clause, or sentence accurately. Now, let's turn to the Greek word in our next study. The word pisteuo that we discovered earlier that was being used to translate the Hebrew word aman, and which has then been translated into the English word believe. What can we learn from that, from a New Testament perspective, especially since the Old Testament word is at the heart of the New Testament understanding of the word believe?